baby! I've been waiting to get to this game. Sonic 3 and Knuckles. In my opinion, the best classic Sonic game in the series. Still love you, Mania. This game brought so much to the table for the franchise. Being the first introduction of the mainstay location of Angel Island. The first introduction of not only the Master Emerald, but also its protector and new character, Knuckles the Echidna. And all of the contents of Angel Island culminating into the biggest classic game in the series thus far. So much in fact that this became the first Sonic game with save files. You know how most zones in the previous games can be beaten in about 2 minutes tops? Sonic 3 and Knuckles zones usually take around 3 minutes at minimum. For comparison, here's Mystic Cave Act 1, the 6th zone in Sonic 2. It's varied, but it could be beaten in about a minute and a half tops. Now here's Launch Base Act 1, the 6th zone of Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Yeah, pretty noticeable size difference, huh? The amount of paths you can take, the goodies you can find, and the amount of ways you can get to the goal is gigantic. And hell, the game was separated into 2 cartridges due to the sheer amount of content it had, and was impossible to put all this stuff into one cartridge at the time. Lock those 2 suckers together, and you have the full adventure, consisting of a grand total of 12 entire zones. And the best part is, it's a blast to play through from beginning to end. And as you can see from the length of this video, I have a whole lot to talk about. For you see, not only is every zone in the game full of variety with their content, but every act is different from one another. Despite that, I'll rank the zones here as a full package rather than each act. But I will talk about the acts individually, because some acts are better than others in this game. I'll also talk about a few Knuckles segments depending on what he goes through compared to what Sonic goes through. Because Knuckles is just as viable as Sonic in a game called Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Also, because he has some alternate paths in a few levels, so there's that. Also, I'm obviously not counting Hidden Palace for the same reason I didn't count Death Egg in Sonic 2, because it's essentially a boss zone. And I really had to think about this ranking, because I love nearly every zone in this game. I think the game has like 4 S tiers at least, so it was actually hard for me choosing which zones I ranked above the others. Not to mention I replayed the levels over and over and over again, just so I can form my final thoughts. And I played them as everyone. Sonic with Tails, Sonic alone, Tails, and Knuckles. So yeah, I took a lot of research into consideration. While I do dislike a couple of them, I would never put them in F tier or even E tier, and they're still miles above some of the other bottom listers. Of course, there are a couple D tier zones down here though, and we'll talk about them shortly. This is gonna be a long one, people, so grab some snacks, buckle up, and without any more stalling, let's head into the masterpiece that is Sonic 3 and Knuckles. So, like I mentioned, while I do love the majority of the stages in this game, there are a couple of duds in between this game's numerous bangs. While I don't despise these levels, they do bring the game down to just a masterpiece rather than absolute perfection. The first and the lowest of the weaker stages, in my opinion, has to go to Marble Garden Zone. While far from being the absolute worst in the classic series, the negatives of this stage does slightly outweigh the positives. Let's get the positives out of the way first, since unlike other last place zones, this zone does have plenty of good qualities. Firstly, I love the setting of this place. Having it take place in ancient ruins full of booby traps and crumbling structures gives us some interesting lore implications, like there's a history to this floating island that we don't know of right now. Next, while I do think it does have some annoying obstacles here, which I'll get into, the level can still feel fast-paced every now and then, with plenty of hills to go down, and these cool poles you could spin down from. I especially love the opening of Act 1, where you go down several hills and get a shit ton of rings. Not to mention it can be satisfying to do some platforming every now and then. It also has our good friend Bubbles. He's always nice to see. Alright, now on to why I actually kind of dislike this zone. It's mainly because of the mechanics of this place. A lot of them feel like pace breakers and are more annoying than they are fun. Some of them aren't that annoying, like these wheels that you can spin dash on to open structures, and these pulleys that help you up slopes. Those aren't so bad to use, but they aren't enough to justify the annoying mechanics. One of the main mechanics of this zone is these spinning tops that you run on, which are typically used to break structures you can't break yourself. And I really don't like using these things. They just feel incredibly clunky to run on. When you try to run in the opposite direction on this thing, it doesn't just turn around then move up in that direction. It slows down, descends, then ascends again in the opposite direction. I get that it's a momentum and physics thing, but still, it can be pretty situational in certain areas. I would have preferred if it just turned around instantly. Not to mention, if this thing does just as much as graze the ground, it speeds through, and you can't go up again until it stops by a wall. And God forbid if it's a hazard or enemy, because if you hit those without invincibility, you are knocked out of the thing. Worst part is that this mechanic is used for half of Act 1, which is great. I gotta say as well, I hate these spinning spike balls, because I swear, no matter how many times I play this game, I can never remember where they are, and I always get hit by them. Mainly because they're put in spots that no one, not even the best and most skilled players in the world, could possibly predict. This level is also full of moving structures, mainly in Act 2, which are either blocking a path or can give you a path. Like the wheels I mentioned before, letting the tunnel bot or Robotnik take the structures down themselves, and these stone statue heads that shoot at you if you're at its sight. Hit the red glowing gem 3 times, and the structures rise for you. And again, a lot of these feel more like pace breakers, and it makes Act 2 in particular mostly a slog to go through. Kind of a hot take, but I actually don't mind the length of a Sonic stage. For me, what's important for any video game level is to be consistently exciting and engaging. You can keep me on a level for about 10 minutes if you want to. As long as it keeps spicing things up and adds to the stage and makes it more fun, I'll still come out of it completely satisfied. Marble Garden Act 2 isn't fun or engaging. It's just mostly boring. Half the act is just you unblocking a bunch of paths one after the other. Though credit where credit's due, there is a pretty neat section near the end of Act 2 where you're racing against a collapsing temple caused by Robotnik. Yeah, I think I've made myself clear on my thoughts of this place. Bottom line, it's not really one of the worst levels in the franchise, but definitely the weakest of this game. Hey guys, isn't it great that two of my least favorite zones in the game happen to be back to back to each other? Because we're heading from Marble Garden Zone to Carnival Night Zone. Yay! Okay, once again, let's look at the positives of this place first. Since there's significantly more things I like about this zone compared to Marble Garden, namely the setting and most of the obstacles. This place completely takes advantage of the setting, from the colorful carnival aesthetic to that bouncy yet funky circus music. By the way, just to be clear, while the king of pop himself, Michael Jackson, did have some involvement, he didn't compose most of the music. That title belongs to Brad Buxer. That whole ordeal is an entirely different can of worms to get into. If you want more info on this topic, go watch this video by The D-Pad. He could explain the history of it better than my dumbass can. Alright, back to Carnival Night. While it has a couple of obstacles you would expect, like bumpers and bouncers, the stage also has other creative obstacles, like balloons you could bounce off of, a platform with tons of balloons under that goes high up depending on how low you bring it, circus cannons that launch you across the level, and these cool hovering platforms. If I'm being honest, Act 1 in particular is actually quite fun to play through. It's consistently fast-paced, has plenty of fun obstacles that add to the fun, and overall just really exciting to play on. So why do I have it this low, you may be asking? This is where Act 2 comes in to rain on this colorful parade. Yeah, Act 2 basically takes the fun little mechanics that made Act 1 enjoyable, and makes most of them a giant hindrance here. Like, the bumpers and bouncers weren't so bad in Act 1, but in Act 2, they are loaded with these stinkers, and for half of the stage, you will be bounced around by them, and consistently be pushed back, which is incredibly annoying. This makes Act 2 drag on, and again, I don't mind the length of a stage, but I do mind when the length is caused by stuff that consistently holds me back from making progress and wastes more of my time. It's home to the most pointless use of water in the game. I can understand levels like Angel Island, Ice Cap, or even Launch Base having underwater segments, but why Carnival Night? Doesn't help at all that the underwater segments really blow. It somehow ran into the traps that the actual water level avoided, that being very clunky to play on and feeling very cramped. You could have not had the water here at all, and the level would be significantly better. I will admit though, there is a neat touch where if you pop the balloons underwater, you're given air bubbles. And I do like the idea of the carnival being powered down for half of the act. But I know what you folks want me to talk about. Yep, we're going to address the red and white elephant in the room. It's time to talk about the Barrel of Doom. So what makes this barrel so notorious, you might be asking? Oh my god, where do I begin? Well, firstly, they were technically there in Act 1, but they were never a roadblock in the main path. so no one was curious about how they worked in that act. Then Act 2 comes in, and you run into a room where you encounter nothing but a red and white spinning barrel. Now, I personally had a different, more easier experience with this thing, and I'll soon explain what that experience was, because I'm in the minority on that aspect. Let's put this into perspective for the majority of people who experience this thing for a second. Imagine if you were a kid, mainly without internet like the ones in 1994, and you made it to this part. You get on the thing and wonder how to use it. You try as much as you can to get this thing to move down, and it just doesn't let you. You try jumping on it like a trampoline, but it isn't going low enough for you to jump off, and you can't spin dash on the barrel to bring you down. The manual mentions nothing about the mechanics of this thing, and like I mentioned, there's no internet to help you. So as you'd imagine, a lot of kids that played this game usually got stuck in this area, giving them countless time overs, and some of them never even being able to beat the game. And you want to know the kicker of all this? You might be wondering, what exactly do you have to do to move this thing? You plain and simply jump on it to give it momentum, then move up and down. Yup, that's all you do. Now again, I personally never got this experience, because prior to fully playing Sonic 3 for the first time, I saw that Sonic Short segment with the Carnival Night Barrel, so I knew what to do when I got there, and I'm sure some kids probably figured it out themselves. But again, that's not what the majority of people experienced. They experienced it the hard way. This one obstacle lives in infamy in the Sonic community, to the point that it was referenced within some Sonic media itself. It was called the Barrel of Doom in LEGO Dimensions. It was blown up by E123 Omega in the comics, specifically Sonic Universe number 67. And it even got to the point where Yuji Naka and Takashi Iizuka themselves actually apologized for the barrel. So, yeah, that's what makes this barrel, and this zone in general, so infamous. One more thing I want to say before I stop talking about this stage, and the reason why I put it a little bit higher than Marble Garden, is because playing this stage as Knuckles is hilarious. He practically doesn't go through any of Act 2. You just go through a couple of speedy tubes, do some platforming, and break the capsule. He doesn't even get a boss fight at the end, which again is hilarious. But yeah, very annoying zone otherwise that lives in absolute infamy. Now we get to the first zone of the Sonic and Knuckles half of the game, and the only C tier in the game, and I'm pretty sure we all know where I'm going with this one. Yep, we're going into Sandopolis. So, here's the thing about this placement. I actually think Sandopolis is a decent stage as a whole. Yes, including Act 2. Of course that's not without its problems, but first let's talk about Act 1. I feel like Act 1 is actually a pretty solid stage for the most part. I love the scorching desert it's set in, I love going down the sand slides as well as scaling them up with these platforms, and I do like the idea of some goodies being under quicksand. The nice thing about that is that they usually give you a hint by showing a platform where you can sink to. Not to mention, for the most part, being pretty well paced with some nice variety for alternate paths. Though Act 1 isn't perfect, there are a couple of mechanics I'm not too big on. Not because they're boring or frustrating, but because of how pointless some of them are. For example, the zone is full of these ropes that you grab onto, and you use them to jump down repeatedly, with some of them giving you a little spin animation. But why would I use those when I could make it faster by just simply jumping down? Same goes for the blocks you push. It's not like the quicksand down there instantly kills you. Jumping through the quicksand takes about as much, if not less time than if you were to use ropes or blocks. And they always have a platform that takes you up in the end. I mean, to be fair, I would rather skip a mechanic that slows you down rather than be forced to do a pace-breaking mechanic, but still, why would I ever take an obstacle that would slow me down when I could just skip it easily? But other than those issues, Act 1 is pretty good. Act 2, on the other hand, is the one lots of people hate, where you're inside the pyramid. If I'm being honest, while I don't like it that much, I do feel some of the issues here are a little exaggerated. Don't get me wrong, Act 2 is kind of boring, but it doesn't really have too many things that are inherently frustrating. You have to traverse the act with a bunch of puzzles to go through, like opening doors, and at one point, getting out of a looping slide. People usually have trouble with this slide puzzle, but to be honest, I don't really know why. In my opinion, it's no different from Ice Cap's looping slide. And I know some of you are thinking, that slide had a hint of what to do with the platform on the side. But so does this slide with that swinging platform moving side to side next to the slide you have to go on. I hate to say it, but It's a bit of a skill issue on some of your guys' part. Anyways, one of the main mechanics of this place are these ghosts that become more and more visible as the pyramid gets darker. I'm gonna be real here, these ghosts really aren't that bad. Not only are there light switches everywhere, practically giving them no time to attack, but even when they are attacking, they really aren't that hard to dodge. There are sections where you use rising sand to ascend higher in the level, and you need to keep an eye on your surroundings so you don't get crushed. Like I mentioned, at least half of the level does have these switches that open these doors, and while most of them aren't annoying, they aren't very fun either. Some of them do require some creative thinking though, and this leads to one switch which isn't a huge deal, but I hate getting to it when playing as Knuckles. There's a section for him where you need to push a block at the switch to keep the door open, because if you do it normally, you won't have enough time to get past the door before it closes. But there's a gap between the block and the switch. The main idea is that you're supposed to hit one of these sand block things, and have the sand rise to a level where the block can pass the gap and push the switch. Where's the sand block exactly? You have to climb up the door, and at the top is a sand block you need to break. I really hate that, because none of the other doors were climbable beforehand, and I think it's reasonable to assume most people would think this one wasn't climbable either. I don't know why the other walls couldn't be climbed on as well. Yeah, it would be mostly pointless, but at least it would serve as a hint for this puzzle. I remember my first time playing as Knuckles in this stage, wasting so much damn time looking for that sand block. Screw this part. Regardless, I think this zone is alright as a whole. But thankfully, those are all the decent and below stages. Next up is the B tier stages, which there are 3 of them. From this point on, it's mostly going to exclusively be praised with a few minor criticisms. So let's get to it. Like I mentioned, it was actually really hard ranking these zones because of how solid most of them are. For example, in my first draft of the list, I actually had this level higher than the next placement, but after repeated playthroughs of both stages, I've come to the conclusion that Mushroom Hill is the slightly less good zone of the two. Make no mistake, I still think this is a pretty good zone, especially for the beginning zone of the Sonic and Knuckles portion, just not as good as the others in this list. It's one of the shorter zones in the game, where both acts can take about 2.5 minutes max. The more I think about it actually, the best description I can get for Mushroom Hill Zone is that it's the closest zone Sonic 3 and Knuckles has to a Sonic 2-like level, which isn't a bad thing at all. I love the bigger zones in this game, but sometimes it's nice to have a smaller scale zone to mellow down a little bit, especially after a large and eventful level like Launch Base Zone, and Mushroom Hill does a great job in that department, being fast-paced and stimulating while taking advantage of its creative setting. Speaking of Sonic 2, you can pull an Emerald Hill on this level by collecting every Chaos Emerald or Super Emerald in this one zone, since there are a lot of giant rings that aren't hard to find, which is pretty neat. Anyways, Act 1 and 2 aren't drastically different from each other, except for aesthetic differences, with Act 1 having a summer setting, and Act 2 having an autumn and later on a winter setting. Other than that, it's essentially the same fast-paced level with the same obstacles. As the name implies, there are a hell of a lot of mushrooms, and they aren't for show either. Nearly every mushroom you run into is interactive. The larger mushrooms you pass by can bounce you up high, and can go higher each time you bounce on them. A lot of them don't really have much of a purpose, with a few exceptions, but it's strangely amusing to bounce on them, mainly because of the noise. I love the noise it makes. Those aren't the only fungus-based obstacles. There's mushrooms that are falling platforms, mushrooms that act as seesaws that launch you up in the air, and mushrooms that act as parachutes where you float down, and when in contact with wind, can fly up high. Even has badniks disguised as mushrooms and these mole enemies that throw mushrooms at you. These mole enemies should be annoying, but they're easy to avoid, and even when they do hit you, it looks hilarious, so I don't mind too much. Not all of the obstacles are mushroom based though, and those are a little more mixed if I'm being honest. You have these poles that launch you either horizontally or vertically, and even when you aren't really going that fast, the moment you pass through these, you go to Mach speed. There are these swinging bars that can help you get to higher ground, as well as these vines that act as bridges to let you pass over spikes. One obstacle I'm not really a fan of is these lifts, which you go up by pulling the handles. They aren't the worst things to deal with, as most of them are optional, but the couple mandatory ones just feel a little slow to use. But still, a lot of these obstacles make for a pretty good zone all things considered, and a great introduction to the second half of the game. I do want to end this off with mentioning one more obstacle that I have a funny history with. There are a few select areas where you get caught in these vines, and you have to spin dash to get out. When I played this on Mega Collection as a wee lad, I would sometimes get stuck on these, and I didn't know how to spin dash at that point, so I just assumed that the game was over and that I lost. I was truly a stupid kid. And now we get to the very first level of the game, Angel Island Zone. Much like Mushroom Hill, you're probably questioning why Angel Island is so low on the list. But much like Emerald Hill being at the lower end of my Sonic 2 ranking, just because the first level is down here, doesn't mean it's a bad stage at all. It's just that it doesn't have as much to offer as later levels, being the first stage and all. With that said, Angel Island is a really good start to the game. In fact, it's probably my favorite beginning level so far. It does exactly what any great first level in a sequel does. Teaches the player all the new mechanics and abilities, while keeping them familiar with the old mechanics as well. It deviates away from the usual Green Hill format, and instead does something completely unique. For starters, it takes place in a jungle, as opposed to the usual green field with a checkered pattern on the ground. Already this zone is giving itself more of an identity. You have the standard stuff like your loop-de-loops, and occasional little spectacle moments like these slopes that launch you up, and scaling up a tree by running around inside it. But then it shows off the new mechanics that you'll see throughout the game. From major ones like these giant rings hidden in the levels that lead you to the special stages, to subtle ones like pushing this rock to get some goodies, which is helpful for certain levels. That's not to mention the exclusive mechanics this stage has, like these zip lines that spin you around at the end, swinging bars that you jump between, and platforms coming out of waterfalls, whether it's falling logs or rock structures popping out. And then, this game introduces the biggest shakeup, where the atmosphere completely changes in the middle of the level, with these fire machines burning up the jungle, and now you're running through a forest fire, basically introducing acts that are completely different from each other. You go through the rest of Act 1 and all of Act 2 in this incinerated jungle. Despite the aesthetic differences though, Act 2 isn't that much different from Act 1, aside from some new obstacles like this spinning bridge, and this moment before the boss where you're running away from a green airship dropping bombs and watching poor Tails get blasted by them. I do love this moment though where you go on this one zip line, and halfway through, it burns up and you drop down. That's a cute detail. Though it's the only fire-related thing you can interact with. Well, besides the bosses, but we'll get to them later. One other thing that separates it from Green Hill or Emerald Hill is that you don't just move right and sometimes roll or jump to get to the goal. You have to do some scaling, like platforming up the waterfall for instance. Of course this isn't unique to Angel Island, as levels like Metropolis Zone did have some scaling as well, but it serves as an indicator for how large Sonic 3 and Knuckles is compared to previous games, when the first level is more expansive and takes more than 2 minutes to beat. As Knuckles, you're actually underground for most of the stage, and this basically acts as a tutorial for the moveset Knuckles has, like his gliding and climbing up walls. Finally, it does a great job showing off one of the greatest additions this game gave to the franchise, the elemental shields. I love these shields. Not only do they do a great job blocking projectiles, but there's 3 unique shields, with all of them being helpful in some way. From how they interact with certain obstacles, to giving you extra abilities by pressing the jump button again after jumping. Here's how each of them functions in case you're curious. The fire shield protects you from fire and gives you an air dash. The electric shield protects you from electric hazards, which are rarely seen, pulls rings towards you, and gives you an extra jump. And the bubble shield gives you a bounce attack, and can let you travel underwater without worrying about air. I'll talk more about each of them for certain levels. So, yeah, in conclusion, Angel Island is a really great introduction stage for this long and fun journey. On the topic of scorching levels, let's dial up that thermostat by going from the burning jungle of Angel Island to the inside of a volcano with lava reef zone. To be honest, I don't really have a whole lot to say for this one compared to other levels. It's just a really well-paced level where patience plays a major key. Starting with Act 1. Since it takes place in a volcano, there's obviously going to be some lava-based obstacles, jumping on rocks to stay out of pools of lava, lava falls that appear periodically, and fireballs that shoot out of these cannons. As you would have guessed, the fire shield is very useful here, but that doesn't mean you can plow through the level with no issue, as there are plenty of hazards that can take away your fire shield very easily. Of course it can come from standard stuff like spike traps and badniks, but you also have big obstacles, like spinning spike balls, giant spike balls rolling around, which are nowhere near as annoying as the ones in Marble Garden, and a crushing device with spikes under that serves as a platform. I actually really like that. It encourages the player not to get too cocky and keep watch of their surroundings. They could have easily fell into the trap where they would make most of the hazards fire-based, and make the stage a complete joke, unlike another fire-based zone I know of, but they thankfully didn't. I also love how in the background of Act 1, you can see the Death Egg poking out. I knew the Death Egg was there in Act 2, but not in Act 1 as well. Again, I love background details like that. My only real problem with it is that it mostly feels pretty linear, which isn't a huge problem as long as it's fun and challenging, which Act 1 certainly is, but I would have liked a little more variety in their design rather than just jumping upstairs every now and then and pushing buttons to open doors. I mean, hey, it's a step up from Sandopolis with the switch pushing. After Act 1, it does the opposite of what Angel Island Zone did, and cools down, having you travel through a crystallized cave. Act 2 is definitely more platformer heavy compared to Act 1. There aren't as many lava-based obstacles, but there are still fire hazards every now and then. Act 2 is all about patience and waiting for the right moment to move forward. You have stuff like these geysers that blast fire, spinning spike balls, moving platforms you have to carefully jump on, and this spinning device that you have to launch yourself up with. Despite having these obstacles that require good timing, it feels fun to play, not only because it feels more varied with alternate routes to take, but it can be fun avoiding these at a fast pace for the most part. Knuckles once again goes through his own endeavors in this zone. In fact, this is the final zone in this story, since the next stage is just essentially him fighting the final boss. But it essentially has the same obstacles, except with a little bit of gliding and wall climbing. Well, that's really all I have to say about Lava Reef. Now we move on to the two A-tier stages. Though once again, there's one more thing I want to say before I move on. While I was recording footage for this stage, I found one of Robotnik's diabolical traps, or in other words a glitch, where I tried to crush myself as Hypersonic, because I like to play fair here, and instead of getting crushed, I clipped through the floor, and I had to wait for the time to run out. Maybe I could have reset it, but hey, it was funny regardless. Welp, we've made it to the halfway point, and what better way to celebrate the halfway point than to talk about the only one-act zone in the game. That's actually a level. Sky Sanctuary Zone. This, in my opinion, is the best possible level you can do for a climax before the final level. Racing upwards to get to the Death Egg to prevent Robotnik from achieving his evil schemes with the Master Emerald. Complete with a cutscene at the start where the Death Egg rises and starts releasing egg robos to attack you. All while set in these beautiful ancient temples in the sky with heavenly music playing as you dash through the floating ruins. There's even a cute little Easter egg where if you're standing to the right of Knuckles and duck down a few times, he does a little animation telling you to go on without him. Of course, spectacle would mean nothing if the level isn't fun, but coming from Sonic 3 and Knuckles, they wouldn't let an eventful level go to waste, so of course it's fun. It feels great to sweep by this level and quickly platform on these collapsing pillars while bouncing on these egg robos. This stage has plenty of satisfying mechanics, like running across these crumbling bridges, bouncing off of these clouds complete with a nice little flip animation, and these spinning platforms with spikes at the bottom that will automatically give you a spin dash when it hits the ground. You also have a few encounters with Mecha Sonic in this stage, who we'll talk about later. Little tip by the way, if you're Hypersonic, you could actually skip your second encounter with Mecha Sonic. And as Tails, you can completely screw this stage over and fly up to avoid both Mecha Sonic encounters, as well as a huge chunk of the stage. The one and only flaw with this level is that it's only one act. If there were two acts here, I probably would have had it in third or maybe even second place in the list, but alas, 'twas not meant to be. But that doesn't stop it from being an absolute blast of a stage. So, I would like to mention another reason why this was a really hard list to make. Not only because almost all of them are solid, but because there were certain levels I initially had higher on the list, but were put a little lower because I was noticing a few more issues that brought the experience down by a slight margin. Basically what I'm trying to get at is that Flying Battery Zone got a little lower for me as I was replaying it. Now make no mistake, I still think this is a really great zone for the most part. In fact, I initially had this zone in third place, and considered it an S tier zone, until I noticed a couple things on this recent playthrough that ultimately held it back from that status. Act 1 is absolutely phenomenal though, basically taking the ideas Wing Fortress Zone from Sonic 2 had, and expanding them to an insane degree. The mechanics of this level are just so fun and creative. I love what they do for the obstacles here in this flying battleship. Grabbing onto the poles of the propellers and timing it just right to fling to the next pole. False capsules that either give you rings, bounce you up, or can even have bad necks pop out. And some cylinder piston thing that only appears once in the entire stage. Strange, but still pretty cool. We also have the returning spinning cages that feel more satisfying here than they did in Metropolis. Magnetic ceilings that pull up enemies, iron balls, and even platforms. And in general, platforming that's tricky, but incredibly satisfying to pull off. There are a couple gripes I have with this zone, Like having sections where you need these tiny rockets to hit the ground 5 times to get an opening, when 3 of them launch in a pattern, which is an incredibly odd choice, but it's not that big of a deal. And I just love that one of the badniks is a computer mouse that acts like scampering mice. I love that, that's cute. So yeah, Flying Battery has an S tier Act 1, and then it gets followed up by a B tier Act 2. Yeah, Act 2 in my opinion just isn't as fun as Act 1. Don't get me wrong here, it's still fun for the most part, more so than something like the second acts of Marble Garden or Carnival Night, but it has a couple more things that brings this stage down from being one of my absolute favorites. A lot of the cool mechanics from Act 1 are absent in this act, in place of obstacles that can be fun, but for the most part aren't as fun. You do a significant amount of waiting in Act 2. 1/3 of Act 2 has you waiting in these screw-like elevators, which don't take a long time to stay on, but they feel like pace breakers at times, and there are areas where you need to wait for these magnetic platforms. With all that said, it can still be really fast paced and really fun to plow through. I especially love these pendulums you run across to keep the speed going, and the cylinder cages are still really fun to go through, even if they aren't as often seen. I can't stress this enough, Act 2 is still a good act, I just wish the pacing was a little bit better. If Act 2 kept the good pacing Act 1 had, this would have easily been an S tier zone, but alas, because of Act 2 being only good and not amazing, it's gonna get bumped down to A tier. Which, hey, it's still a passing grade to have, isn't it? Speaking of which, we're done with the A tier stages. Now it's time for the S tier zones. These are the 4 levels that are among not only the best this game has to offer, but some of, in my opinion, the best levels in the franchise's history. Let's get to it. I hate ice levels. To me, they are my least favorite types of levels in any video game. Mainly because the slippery nature of them is usually very frustrating to control, and makes certain levels unenjoyable. I don't think all of them are bad per se, but they usually don't mesh well with the majority of games, especially in platformers. So, how did the Sonic franchise manage to make one of the best ice levels in gaming history in its very first attempt? You would think mashing the speed-based philosophy of Sonic with an ice level would be a recipe for disaster, but they made the level very carefully and added some extra ingredients to make Ice Cap Zone a masterpiece. And by God did they succeed! What makes Ice Cap so good, you may ask? Well, for starters, they made a smart decision to not make the floor slippery, so already it's better than a majority of ice levels. As for the content the level itself has, well, it starts off with a bang with Sonic snowboarding down the mountain, pretty much starting one of his trademark skills, which we'll see a whole lot more of throughout the series' history. Then after that, you're put inside of an ice cavern, which looks absolutely beautiful with the shining crystals in the background. I also just love the cute minor details of the stage, like having to break capsules and buttons out of ice, and spin dashing through the snow in Act 2. It just feels so oddly satisfying to me. And it helps that the stage itself is very fun and varied with its obstacles. Act 1 is full of slides, crushing pillars, falling icicles that can act as platforms, devices that freeze you into an ice block, and swinging platforms that go up high depending on how fast you go towards the platform. There are certain areas where you go down a looping slide, and there are these platforms that break through the ice pillars blocking your path. One of them is seen in plain sight, encouraging you to jump onto it at the right time, and the other is on the left where you need to push. The second one might be slightly more vague, but they aren't hard to figure out. Act 1 is kind of linear, I will admit, but like I said back on Lava Reef, linearity doesn't automatically ruin a level, as long as it's fun, and Ice Cap Act 1 is very fun to play on. I just love timing my jumps right for the swinging platforms that are swinging up high. You even get a cool alternate path with Knuckles as he glides over a bunch of floating spiky ice crystals. Act 2, on the other hand, mainly takes place outside, and is a lot more faster and full of forks in the road for alternate paths, having lots of loop-de-loops and slopes that launch you up high. Sometimes there are these slingshots that fling you in the air, which can be really fun to use, especially in areas like this with a whole ton of rings around. You can actually go back to the ice cave in the lower path, and Knuckles actually spends a majority of the time down there. There are areas underground where you're platforming on chunks of ice to avoid the watery bottomless pit below you. Act 2 is still incredibly fun, even if there are minor bits of jankiness. There are times where you're running so fast, hoping to make a big jump, and Sonic just stops short for whatever reason. And platforming on these ice blocks over water can be a little clunky depending on when you jump. But that doesn't stop the zone at all from being very fun. And all of that is complete with some phenomenal music. Which, in case you didn't know this little bit of trivia, Ice Cap's music was a rewritten version of the, at the time, unreleased song by Brad Buxer's former band, the Jetsons, called Hard Times. And go listen to the song, it's really good. Not a bad start at all for the franchise's first ice level. Good job, guys. Good job. Death Egg is the best final level in the classic series, and it really isn't a competition. Like, holy shit, talk about a glow up. They took a look at that tiny little quote-unquote stage from Sonic 2, and basically said to themselves, you know what? Maybe we should take advantage of the fact that Robotnik has his own Death Star. And Christ almighty did they run home with it. The atmosphere is impeccable, with the gigantic interior of Act 1 just showing how big in scale the Death Egg actually is, and the outside of Act 2 where you can see that you're way above the atmosphere and you're officially at the final hurdle of this adventure. They actually managed to get this place to look very intimidating and dangerous looking. Like, you take one look at this place and you know it's bad news. And I mean that in the absolute best way possible. In addition to some phenomenal music that raises the stakes even more. And on top of all that, the zone itself is amazing. The stage is just very well balanced with its difficulty. It's challenging enough to be the final level, but not too challenging to come off as unfair or cheap. Containing stuff like missiles, electricity fields, conveyor belts that change direction every time you jump on them, and tubes that you run into spinning around as the gravity is warping. There's also these cool transportation beam devices that lets you travel around the zone. I like that they actually made most of these optional, giving you a choice to get through the level quicker on these devices, or skipping them and getting a few goodies along the way. I also like this big area where you bounce around on 6 yellow buttons on this device. It's surprisingly fun actually, especially after you're done with it and you dash through the tubes. Act 2 is entirely based on gravity, as it constantly switches for a majority of the level, either by going in the anti-gravity tubes that I mentioned before, or pushing these buttons to switch on a dime. And, as you'd expect, it's full of alternate paths that adds a ton of replay value to the stage. Right at the start of Act 1, you have a choice between running up the light bridge and grabbing onto the magnetic handle to take you to a higher path, or go past it to explore more of the level. And in Act 2, you actually have the option to go into 2 entirely separate paths because of this gravity area. The left path is going to have you use the gravity switching buttons and avoiding electrical fields, and the right path has more descending platforms and conveyor belts. I think the right path might be faster, but regardless of which one you choose, both are very fun to go through. And just in case you're curious, going down gives you the electric shield. Speaking of which, it's also worth noting that this is one of the only stages where you can take advantage of the electric immunity feature on the electric shield, but the lightning bolts coming out of the electric fields can still hurt you somehow. My only 2 minor complaints I have with this level is that blue bitch badnik that just pops out in certain areas when you least expect it, and the conveyor belt elevators could have been handled a little better, since it's hard to get used to them switching every time you jump on them, especially with tails. Other than those 2 very minor problems, I genuinely can't think of anything bad about this place. I couldn't have asked for a better final level for this glorious game. Word of advice, by the way, with the insta-shield, which you use by pressing any button after jumping, it can actually prevent you from taking contact damage from the missiles. Don't know how that works, but hey, maybe it could help for speedrunning. Oh boy, I've been dying to talk about this stage. It's time to talk about Hydro City Zone. Yes, I'm one of those fans that calls it Hydro City and not Hydrocity. I know there's some that could make the argument that Hydro City doesn't have a space between it like the other zones do. I mean, Ice Cap has no space either, and I don't hear anyone call that zone Ike Cap. That's why I call it Hydro City. Case closed. Anyways, I think it's easily safe to say that Hydro City is the best water level in the classic series, if not the entire series. This level did what no other water level did before. Even the good ones like Aquatic Ruin. It's making the underwater segments just as fun as it is above water. No matter what path you can take in this stage, it does its very best to be as fast and exciting as possible. Let's first dive in, pun intended, to Act 1. Near the beginning, you're given an option to either stay underwater or go above the water and do some platforming. And again, regardless of which path you choose, you're gonna have a blast. One of the big reasons why the underwater sections are fun here is because of the bubble shield, baby. With this thing, you don't have to worry about searching for air bubbles throughout the level. And even if you don't have the bubble shield, it's still very fun to speed through, even though you would need to keep your eye out for some air bubbles. Which is alright because there's plenty of air bubbles to go around. There are these fans that blow you forward through the aqueducts, these spinning devices with a hand that holds you in place for a couple seconds, and then lets you blast off into full speed, and these cables you grab onto, with some of them having maces to look out for. And of course the top half is just as fun, full of loops and being able to run on water, which I'm honestly surprised took them this long to add to the series. If the entire stage was structured just like Act 1, I still would have called it the best water level in the series thus far. It's really well paced and it never feels clunky to play on. Again, how the actual water level feels more fluent to play than the level with barely any water is something I will never understand. But then, just to flex, it hits you with Act 2. Act 2 skyrockets this zone from being the best water level in the series so far to being one of the greatest water levels in all of video game history. For one, it starts off with you running away from a crushing wall, which feels very treacherous and exciting. And then what follows up is one of the most exciting levels you can possibly make in a Sonic game. Hydro City Act 2 makes sure that there is never a dull moment. And Jesus H. Christ, they succeeded. The stage constantly gives you speed, and it leads to so many amazing moments, from running over the water at high speed, to going down corkscrew slides to launch you out of the water. Those hand devices that were in a few select areas in Act 1 are all over Act 2, usually near places where they're helpful, like going up the slides. Of course, it wouldn't be that fun if all you were doing was running through everything without a care in the world. Every now and then, they have you platforming on these rotating tube things, which, unlike the barrels in Carnival Night, you don't have to control them, and it actually feels fun to platform on one after the other. And all that is complete with some of the most energetic and blood-pumping music you'll ever hear in a 16-bit game. I can't think of a single thing that's truly wrong with this zone. The only tiny possible complaint I can think of is that these specific badniks can be a little annoying. But even then, they aren't seen that often, and the bubble shield blocks their projectiles. There's a damn good reason the stage was brought back in Mania, even though it was kind of downgraded there, but we'll get there when we get there. Nothing else to say, except that Hydro City will forever be one of the greatest levels in the franchise. Though I have to give the slight edge to... Launch Base Zone. Okay, it's kind of amazing that we went from back-to-back D-tier zones, and then completely recovered with back-to-back S-tier zones. And Launch Base Zone is one of my absolute favorites in the series. I know some of you might be surprised by the fact Launch Base is at the top, but I feel like this zone is one of the most underrated in the franchise. Similar to Sky Sanctuary, this zone nails the overall vibe it's going for, with not only the setting and music, but how well it conveys the stakes of the story just from the overall atmosphere of it. Once again, you're chasing down the Death Egg, only this time, it's not to get in there and retrieve the stolen Master Emerald, but instead to prevent the Death Egg from launching up again. This level is by far one of the most challenging levels in the game, which makes sense, being the last level of the Sonic 3 half of the game, but it's not designed in a cheap way, but rather in a fair and balanced way. This is a level where the game puts you into one of its biggest tests of high-speed platforming and creative thinking. Being the construction area for the launch site of the Death Egg, this place is littered with all kinds of traps, going from spike traps, flame-throwing statues, lasers from not only these badniks but these laser gates as well, cylinders that you spin around on, spinning elevators, and these zipline-like machines that take you at Mach speed. This might sound crazy, but I kind of consider this zone an omen of what's to come in Death Egg Zone. If the construction site for it is this dangerous and hazardous, you can only imagine what the inside of the zone itself is like. Until you actually get in there later, but that's besides the point. And I don't even really need to remind you how fast-paced this zone is. Showing this footage is enough to demonstrate the crazy shit that goes on here. And it perfectly balances with the fun platforming. And when they stop you for a sec to warn you of an incoming hazard, they never do it in a cheap way. Well, for the most part, not doing it in a cheap way. It's always done in a way where they give you time to react. It feels fairly balanced and satisfying. Act 1 has you speeding around the construction site. Your main obstacles here include these transportation tubes that bring you to different areas, and these crushing devices which requires good timing, and in a few cases, being good platforms. The main mechanic of Act 1 is that you consistently go inside of these buildings that you have to navigate through. They typically have more badniks to deal with, and a majority of them involve destroying these locks to open gates. Act 2 mainly takes place at the lake, where you're running on pipes, and can even go in them by spin dashing into the breakable pipes and go into the water stream to travel through them. Cool thing about Act 2 is that you can pull an aquatic ruin by avoiding the underwater sections for most of the stage. The pacing of this zone is just perfect. Did I mention yet that this zone has so many branching paths? Because, yeah, this zone has so many paths. It's insane. And as you'd expect, all of them are very, very, very fun to play through. And again, like Angel Island, Knuckles spends a majority of the time underground of the construction site. He actually has a unique part where one of the breakable pipes actually causes his portion to flood, which leads him to that one underwater section you would see as Sonic. And we all know this zone has phenomenal music. The grass is green and the water is blue. I don't have much else to say. This is easily my favorite stage of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and one of my favorite stages in the franchise. And I always look forward to it when playing this masterpiece of a game. Now before I get to the bosses, I do want to briefly touch upon the competition mode of this game, since unlike Sonic 2, where the competition was racing on stages within the main game, Sonic 3's competition mode has an entirely unique set of stages not part of the main game. And you can not only race with your friend on these, but you can even play them on your own with time attack mode. And yes, I'm gonna rank them, because, after all, I did title this video every Sonic 3 and Knuckles level ranked, did I not? Which means I have to discuss these as well. And because these were designed to be race stages, all of them are incredibly short, so I won't take too long ranking them. Also, this is going to be the one exception I'm going to make for this video, where I'm going to show the stages in Sonic Origins, because that game finally gave them a full screen view, so I can properly show them off, since, well, look at the original. So without any delay, here are the competition stages. Number 5 is Azure Lake, the first of the bunch, and by far the most boring one. Just go through a couple loops, go over the extremely easy to avoid oil pond, and you're home free. There is a button here that makes a spring show up between the loops, which could be helpful for racing, but why would you ever use it for the time trials, especially since it's there for like 5 seconds. Number 4, Desert Palace. This one is nothing special, just move forward and jump over the quicksand. It does have a loop that goes from the foreground to the background, so it gets a slight edge over Azure Lake. Though it seems to be the buggiest one of the bunch. And this isn't a Sonic Origins exclusive thing, the original is pretty buggy too. Number 3, Endless Mine. I do like the underground atmosphere here. It is mildly amusing to break the blocks, and the music would be one of the inspirations for a kick-ass remix of City Escape, so by default, it's up here. Number 2, Chrome Gadget. I do like the slightly more tricky obstacles here, mainly the descending platform, where if you get off too fast, you'll bounce back and be killed by the bottom that instantly kills you. Yeah, patience is required for this one, and would probably make for some intense races. And number 1 goes to Balloon Park. My favorite of the stages, because I like the carnival aesthetic, I really like these 2 moving platforms that are painted elephant trunks, and it feels satisfying bouncing off the balloons. So that's all I have to say about the competition mode. Thanks for tuning in. And now it's boss time, folks. And much like the levels in this game, we have a lot to talk about. You see, Sonic 3 and Knuckles is the first, and one of the few now that I think about it, Sonic games to have mini-bosses between acts. So, as you would imagine, there's a hell of a lot of bosses to cover. 30 of them to be precise, and some of them can only be fought by certain characters, mainly Knuckles. I'll real quickly say, Sonic 3 and Knuckles has the best selection of bosses so far. A vast majority of them provide a fun challenge and are satisfying to fight. I have a lot of stones to unturn, so I'll try to be as brief as I can with these bosses. It's also worth noting that I'm not counting the 2 Mechasonic fights where he reuses 2 Robotnik contraptions from previous games, nor am I counting the laser fight and flying battery, since all you have to do is dodge it until it stops. It's not really a boss fight. Just saying. I'll start this off by saying that there are really only 2 bosses here that I consider bad fights, and I'm sure you all know what they are. Number 30 goes to the Hotmobile. By far the most boring fight in the game. The only way to damage Robotnik here is by letting his own spike balls hit him with the flowing lava. The worst thing about this fight is that it requires a whopping 14 hits to defeat it. Maybe if it was 10 hits it would be fine, but 14? And he shoots only 3 at a time, meaning you have to let him pop out a total of 5 times, making this fight last a minute and a half. Fucking unbelievable. Number 29 is the Guardian. Another one that's just lame and boring. All this thing does is slowly jump forward, and you push him into the sand. This fight requires a lot of waiting, which is never fun for a boss fight. And no, hitting him repeatedly doesn't make it any faster. I tried. At number 28, we have the Tunnelbot. Not a bad boss fight by any means, but still very easy. It functions similarly to the Egg Digger from Sonic 2, in which it digs up the ceiling and you have to dodge falling stalactites. Knuckles is actually given a tiny boost from this spiky tube thing since he can't jump for shit. At number 27, we have the Gravitron Mobile. All that happens here is that Robotnik tries to drop a ball on you, he makes an electric field that pulls you in, and picks up the ball when he's done. Not a very challenging boss fight because you can reach him using Sonic's Insta-Shield. And like I mentioned before, Knuckles doesn't fight this thing in his stroll through Carnival Night. I don't know why, but hey, I'm not complaining. Number 26 is Fire Breath, the very first boss fight of the game. As Sonic, the only thing it can do is shoot a small stream of fire, and when fighting this thing as Knuckles, it actually fires missiles in a pattern. It is very easy, but at least this thing has an excuse for being very easy since it is the first mini-boss of the game, so I give it a pass. Number 25 is the Egg Golem. I think the design and presentation of this thing is what boosts itself up higher than the others, but it's still pretty pathetic. You have the platform on the hands of this thing, and then hit him at the head, and that gives you an opening to hit him. He shoots lasers every now and then, with a charge-up sound serving as a warning, but you could just keep hitting him on the head. You don't even really need to use the Insta-Shield on this thing. So, yeah, this boss is kind of a joke. Number 24 is the Ball Cannon. This is one of 3 bosses you'll fight in Launch Base Act 2. It's also not very impressive. Basically, you have to dodge a cannonball that Robotnik shoots out of the wall, and switches between shooting at the top or bottom. Thing is though, is that you can easily go on this platform and keep jumping at him, and the platform stays up there for a while. Appropriately, we follow up with number 23, which is the Beam Rocket. Basically, Robotnik ascends or descends on either side of the screen, and shoots lasers at you. You have to destroy 2 of the columns, each taking 4 hits, and 1 final hit on Robotnik. You could very easily destroy the first column by simply spin dashing over the spot he ascends from. It's alright, I suppose. Number 22, the Big Shaker. Simple mini-boss where the thing shifts around back and forth until it lands on this pole to make a whirlpool. Best time to attack is when the orbiting rocket stops spinning. Decent boss. Number 21 goes to the Drillmobile as Sonic and or Tails. There are 2 different variations of this boss fight, and this one is the weaker of the 2. It has a pretty neat concept where Tails is grabbing you as he flies, and you have to time your jumps to hit Robotnik as he appears in different directions. The thing is though, is that you can easily score around 7 hits on him when he's drilling the floor, making this fight a joke. As Tails, it's actually significantly harder, because here you have to use your spinning tails to hit the machine, since he obviously can't curl into a ball while flying. Fine boss fight otherwise. Number 20 is the Hangmobile. Simple, but pretty decent boss fight with Robotnik grabbing the platform and spins around after shooting some streams of fire. This one is known for the funny mistake in the Knuckles story where they didn't change the capsule sprite to the Egg Robo, who Knuckles is fighting with instead of Robotnik. Number 19, the Freezer Mobile. Basically, Robotnik shoots freezing air either left, right, or above the platform you use to hit him. When he has 2 hits left, he loses the platform and descends down, letting you get the 2 hits. Cute detail about this fight is, with Tails, he actually helps you get out of the ice block when you get caught. That's a neat touch. Number 18 goes to the Bowling Spin. While it is a pretty easy boss fight, only taking 4 hits, it is pretty fun fighting it in this Arkanoid-like room where the spinning platform destroys the floor one by one. Just hit the machine to expose its weak spot, and let the platform damage it for you. Number 17 is the Gapsole. Not really a hard boss fight at all, but the creative idea bounces this up higher in the list. Basically all you have to do is stay on top, and spin dash away when it tries to hit you from above. Again, it's easy, but a neat concept. Number 16 goes to the Jetmobile. Pretty neat fight where you're chasing Robotnik as you jump over and dodge rows of spikes on these trees. I actually encountered a weird glitch in Knuckles' story where I was fighting Robotnik and not the Egg Robo. It's not like the Hangmobile where they forgot. No, it's supposed to be the Egg Robo. I don't know if it was because of a special stage or bonus stage I was in, but it's funny regardless. Number 15, Big Istis. Another neat fight involving this machine that takes chunks of ice and has them orbit around it. This one is mainly about timing, made easier by the Insta-Shield. Pretty good fight though. Number 14 is Hey Ho. Okay, we're getting to the good bosses now. This is a fun idea for a boss fight, having this robot chop down trees with logs acting as projectiles. They move straight forward for Sonic and Tails, and they bounce when fighting it as Knuckles. Number 13, we have the Screwmobile. As Sonic, this fight is relatively easy. You have 2 ways of hitting the contraption. You could use the whirlpool as a platform to hit him, or you could use these bombs he drops to hoist you up and land a hit. This boss is significantly more challenging with Knuckles, because, again, he can't jump for shit. And he has no Insta-Shield, so you have to make sure to let the bombs launch you at the right time. Fun fight though. Number 12 is Knuckles himself. This is the first time in the franchise's history where you have character battles. And Knuckles is a pretty fun boss for the first of its kind. You could damage him either by jumping above him, or using the Insta-Shield to hurt him while he's gliding. If you try spin dashing into him, he blocks the attack. let's just say this is one of the few times where a character battle is going to get high in this boss ranking. Number 11 goes to the Twin Hammer. This thing does have a simple pattern of spinning these two maces around for a bit and then stopping, but there's just something so satisfying about using the insta-shield on this fight. As Knuckles, you actually fight two of these things, I guess making them twin hammers. Anyways, it's a little harder as Knuckles, but it's still fun when bouncing off these two. Number 10, the Drillmobile as Knuckles. This is the better of the two Drillmobile fights, with it popping out of the ground making a pattern of when it appears. The fight with Sonic and Tails does have better spectacle, but this fight is more fun to deal with. Number 9, the Egg Scorcher Mark II. First off, I love the consistency with the naming. Secondly, this is one of the best starting bosses in the series. And it starts off with a bang by having him literally burning the bridge to try and drop you to your doom. Though, shouldn't it send us to Hydro City? Oh, who cares, that's just how video game logic is. Anyways, this fight mainly involves dodging fireballs from Robotnik as he pops in and out of the waterfall. Really fun fight. Number 8, we have Heat Arms, one of the few large-scale mini-bosses in the game, and one of the best in the game as well. It's also one of the few times where the mini-boss completely blows away the main boss. First it has these two tentacle-like cannons that each fire 3 projectiles at you, and then this big hand shows up, where you first dodge its grasp, and then hit its red eye. Really good fight. Number 7, the Death Ball, the final mini-boss of the game, and a damn good one to go out on. You can't do any damage by jumping at it because it has these shields that bounce you. Basically, this thing drops these tiny tanks with spikes, and you need to manipulate the gravity of the area to have the spikes damage the robot. But make sure you do it at the right time, or else the shields will block it. You could also spin dash on the tanks that are upside down and launch them up to the Death Ball. It's actually really fun switching the gravity to try and hit this thing. You could even bounce back by the tanks. Number 6 is Red Eye, by far the best mini-boss in the game. This thing has two phases, both of which involve hitting its eye. The first phase has these orbiting balls. When you hit its eye, one of the balls explodes and shoots out spikes in 8 directions. You have a total of 8 hits for this thing. Then the second phase has it floating around with 2 platforms. Soon enough, it shoots a big laser at the bottom, and spins the platforms around, giving you a chance to get hit by the laser. This boss is just really fun and challenging. Number 5, Mecha Sonic Mark II. I just want to say, I adore Mecha Sonic's design here, and hot take, I think he looks cooler than Metal Sonic. It's basically like if they took Mark I and made him more frantic, usually bouncing around as a buzzsaw and sometimes skating backwards after he lands. Very fun fight, but not the best of Mecha Sonic, as you'll shortly see. Number 4, Big Arms. This fight was originally only available in Sonic 3, but thanks to Origins, now everyone can fight this thing with Sonic. The trade-off being worse arrangements of the prototype music for 3 of the zones. Moving on from that, in this fight, you have to make sure to avoid the arms, otherwise when he grabs you, he slams you into the ground and either takes away your rings or kills you. This is an incredible finale to the Sonic 3 half of the game. You actually fight this thing as Knuckles, and while you can't do the insta-shield, it still feels very fun to fight because of the fact that you can glide into it. Number 3, Mecha Sonic Mark II, Phase 2. This is the final boss fight for Knuckles, doing something insane for a robot copy of Sonic, and actually using the Master Emerald's power to go super. Hello? Peak design? Now Mecha Sonic flies and shoots giant energy balls at you, and shoots energy rings from 8 directions, and sometimes he even charges down at you in his buzzsaw form. A fantastic finale for Knuckles' side of the story. Number 2, Final Weapon, aka Doomsday Zone's boss. And fittingly enough, we head to the final boss of the entire game, starting another tradition of supersonic boss fights. And they really set the standard in their first attempt. Having Super or Hypersonic flying through the asteroids to chase Robotnik makes this feel so epic and climactic. And leading the missiles he shoots at you back at him feels so satisfying. And of course the final portion where you ram him a few times and then you save the Emerald. Absolutely wonderful final boss, but I have to give number 1 to the Great Eggman Robo. This is the best boss fight in the classic series, bar none. From the absolutely stunning background, to you destroying the fingers with the spin dash feeling so satisfying, then having this thing chase you down with a laser powered by the Master Emerald, and then the final part where you chase him down is just amazing. Absolutely the best boss fight in the game, full of wonderful hits. Whew. That was a mouthful. This was probably my biggest video so far. I truly underestimated how big Sonic 3 and Knuckles would be. Maybe it didn't need to be an hour long, but I wanted to share my love for this game and really analyze and dissect what I love about it, as well as a couple things that I didn't love about it. Consider this a sign of what's to come and for how long my next videos will be in the future. But for now, I'm gonna do one more short ranking, where I get into Sonic Triple Trouble, a Game Gear game that's much smaller in scale. See you guys then, and have a great day.